Hello, and a very warm welcome back to episode 4 of the Jarrang Sessions Email Marketing Podcast. And 4 episodes into the series, and we continue with some great guests. 3 of us here again. My name is Ben Hocking, your host. And from the Jarrang side, we've got Rob Moran along. So email designer and developer. I know you're going to be pretty keen to talk about this topic. So thanks so much for coming along, Rob.
My pleasure.
And we are delighted to say that we have got Sean Duffy. So Sean has got over 15 years of experience in the email marketing industry. He is the owner of Segmentum and also Reignite. Segmentum sort of focusing on the customer lifetime value. And you've got Reignite, which is very much what we're looking towards today in terms of personalization. So thank you, Sean, for coming along.
Good to be here.
Good stuff. So we're going to start with our initial question. If you've seen any of the previous 3 episodes, you'll know that we kick off with the same question every time, and we get quite different answers depending on who we're talking to. So Sean, if you wouldn't mind answering this, and you've been in the email marketing industry for a long time, why is email valuable for you specifically?
Well, I run 2 businesses in the email world, so that's primarily it. But I think if we rephrase the question to why is it important for our customers, and I think it's all about retention. So marketers have all these wonderful digital channels that they can go to, but they all tend to be geared towards acquisition. Email is the one easy digital channel they have where they can go and talk to their existing customers and get them to keep spending more. So there's always a useful stat that I talk to people about around 5% increase in retention can lead up to 95% increase in profits. So retaining customers is a lot cheaper than acquiring new ones. And email is fast. You can get something out there straight away. You can react in real time. We'll talk about personalization today. It's one of those channels where you can talk to people on an individual level. And it's a media channel that you own. It's not like Facebook or PPC where you're having to pay for access and you're always at the whim of algorithm changes and big bad data tech companies. This is your data, and I think that's why it's really important and why email is still so valuable to all the brands out there. It belongs to them.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, the focus of the talk today is going to be on personalization, how to overcome some of the challenges of it, how to most effectively use it, and anything really surrounding the conversation. So, I mean, to kick things off, Sean, if you wouldn't mind, why? Because a lot of people listening to the word personalization might immediately spring to a subject line that has a first name, for example, and that's probably personalization in its most basic form. But we know that it can be so much more advanced than that. So, if you wouldn't mind just explaining the real power that personalization can have for a business.
Yeah, so you're right. Personalization, in a very basic form, is dear first name, and there's some value in that, but not a lot. It's not exactly transformational. Whereas a lot of other personalization can really transform your campaigns. Email marketers tend to do a lot of work, which is all about, I guess, those sort of marginal gains. Testing subject lines, tweaking bits of copy here and there, changing designs. They all have an impact, but they're only so far you can get with that. Personalization, where you're starting to tailor the content based upon that individual's tastes or what you know about them, that's where you start seeing huge differences in performance at that point. So you can start off with, yes, a dear first name. Then the next level might be you might start segmenting your campaigns into 2 or 3, 4 batches. So, different groups depending on maybe their product preferences or where they like to go on holiday. That'll get you so far, but it's still quite generic and it's quite manual. The next stage is you might do one email, but then tailor the content within that using rules. That again is a stage further than segmentation in terms of what you can do with that. But again, you're limited by the number of rules that you can write. And then at the very top level, I suppose, you've got the individualization, we might term it, where the content is completely unique to each individual. So there are rules and algorithms used to determine that, but it's much more scalable that you can do completely 100% unique content to each individual. that might be different holidays you're showing, different products, different news stories, based upon all sorts of data that you own about them. And going back to, I suppose, your question around, is it worth, how valuable is it? I think what personalization does is helps brands with very strategic problems. So if, let's say, you're in the travel industry and you've got, I don't know, you need to get rid of spots on holidays which you haven't, which they could be happening soon and you haven't sold them all out. Personalization can help with that by reaching out to the right customers at the right time, based on here's the deals within your sort of taste zone. In retail, that might be helping out the stocks, stuff like that. How do you recommend the right things in sale to each individual? Or it might be, little niches of the database that you have, which are very particular tastes. How do you get to those people? That's where personalization can solve those sort of challenges, as opposed to just a general, how do we improve our email marketing more? It's a wider impact on the business.
I mean, Rob, you're coming in with a bit of a design look at this. Do you find that, this creativity in terms of how you use your data in terms of personalization, do you find that creativity actually aids the creative process from a design perspective?
Yeah, so I think that if we take email in general as a whole, I think that the limitations of the platform actually enable you to create some more sort of creative and well thought solutions to problems that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So, I mean, I come from a more sort of general graphic design background, so I'm used to creating a lot of stuff for print and all this stuff, where there are no limitations to what you can do. I mean, this is a really bizarre example, but bear with me. Top Gear, it had a very limited budget on the BBC. But then when they moved over to Amazon to create the Grand Tour, they had an unlimited budget. They could do whatever they wanted, but there was no substance to it because there weren't any real sort of creative things happening. I think the limitations really push you into thinking harder. That being said, I think that when it comes to personalization and email, it adds a new avenue for these creative solutions, which I think is great. And it creates so many opportunities to do things with the data that a lot of our clients have, but don't really know what to do with. And like you say, you can do subject lines, you can do put in first name here or there, but I think we're entering a new stage of personalization, which is so exciting. I mean, Sean has kind of shown us a lot of that. I'm very excited to see what comes next.
Absolutely. I mean, looking at, and we'll touch on what you sort of said, Sean, in terms of why should it be worth it for a specific business. Do you believe that it is a very individual basis in terms of what's going to be value for them specifically? Or do you think there are some more maybe generic tips when it comes to personalization that all businesses can kind of take forward?
So we always do kind of go on the basis that personalization will vary for each individual business, because quite clearly your individual customers will have demands. You as a business will have demands in terms of what your business priorities are. I think it's interesting what Rob picked up on there, that clients don't always know how to use personalization. Well, I think the starting point is often what problems do you have within your business, what challenges do you have, or opportunities, and then start that as your starting point and work backwards in terms of what's the ideal thing we could do in order to help those. And that's not necessarily a personalization question, but I can guarantee that the outcome will be personalized campaigns on the back of it to solve those sort of challenges. So again, we go talk about things like stop. In travel, it might be how to increase our direct booking rate. Well, the best way is to get those existing customers back. So how do we do that? We do that with very personalized, tailored campaigns at the right time post their original stay. that's, I suppose, the approach to take is to start with your challenges and your problems and opportunities, and personalization will naturally come out on the back of that.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to pick up on something you actually said, Rob, that we could be entering a next stage of personalization, if you will. And it's subject line personalization is something we've already touched upon as, not dismissing it at all, but it's probably the most basic form of personalization. Sean, do you believe that there is some sort of numbness? Do you think the most basic forms of personalization, do you think people are starting to become numb to them at all?
Not necessarily. I think there's a limit to how often you can, by putting somebody's first name in a subject line, they will actually have an impact. It'll have an impact because it will be a bit different and stand out, but then after time that just becomes wallpaper in itself. Where personalization will continue to have an impact, where you're able to scale it. What I mean by scaling is always having something different to talk about each time, but still be personalized. A lot of people which build up a personalized campaign, let's say it's on favorite country you'd like to go on holiday. Well, once you've done that once, it can sometimes be very difficult to move that, to use that again next week and the following week and the following week. You have to find different ways of spinning things. So, one might be your favorite airport one week, next to favorite destination or similar destinations or types of hotels that you go to. So having a plan for personalization is you can start off with the odd sort of use case at a sort of a low level like that, but you'll find that you'll quickly run out of runway with those sort of things. So really, it's a case of thinking of it as like a ladder climbing up. So you get more and more advanced with your personalization over time, and that will naturally be more scalable as well. And it will run on autopilot for you.
Yeah, I think one of the things I find most fascinating, and I mean, it's one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on this call, Rob, is that data and design are so often seen as the polar opposites in email marketing, when I think they are so well intertwined. And actually, the more you distance them, the more you sort of limit yourselves in terms of the opportunities. When someone comes forward to you, Rob, and with an idea about a campaign in terms of personalization, how does your process go in terms of thinking in your mind how this could be displayed without losing the overall message, the essence of the message that is trying to be brought across here?
Yeah, I think that's really important. You really don't want to put anything in just as a gimmick. You don't want to have a sort of email that just feels like an experiment. It needs to, I think Sean actually touched on this earlier, but everything needs to serve a purpose. There needs to be a reason for you using that personalization. Be that you want to increase profitability by targeting people further, or I don't know. But the personalization actually kind of informs the design in a way, depending on the data that these people have, of course. But I mean, if you're going you're doing an email for a travel agency, for example, you might want to include some weather information, that sort of thing. But you can target that based on sort of where they might be going or where they're thinking of going. And these types of ideas then lead you to really put together these ideas and these campaigns in your mind and really start to lay them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazon is a great example of possibly how not to do it in a kind of a design front as well. So Amazon get away with personalization that they do because they are Amazon, they're kind of unique, but they tend to be quite stale and dry, and it tends to be quite grid-like, and kind of there's no real theme around a lot of the emails that they sort of do. Whereas actually just using personalization on its own, you still need those extra things like the right messaging, the right creativity to make it stand out. Otherwise, it just looks like it's been a job by the IT department, and it won't kind of engage and cut through in quite the way that you want it to.
mean, just to touch on that, and using that example, if you're looking at that and how they use personalization, what do you think the rationale is for a company like that doing it that way? And when you look at it from your perspective, are there any ways in which you would definitely improve it?
So Amazon is pretty unique. They don't need to try too hard because they have people expect it from them, if you like. But for other brands, you have to work a bit harder to stand out, and I think it's really around combining that very data-driven approach, which Amazon are reasonably good at. Certainly on site, less so I think in emails. And I think the example I give is years ago I opened a new Amazon account for work, and I had to order a long monitor cable for work purposes. And after that time, they kept giving me very non-inspirational content about more monitor cables I might like. I mean, I'm not quite that sad that I have a collection of monitor cables. I mean, not far off. But actually, our job as email marketers is to inspire the next purchase. So what you really need to do is take the data around what you do know about that person, and then work out what else in other categories might they also be interested in. That's the job of the data team to do that work. But then it's also the job of the creative team and the copy team to sort of almost merchandise those things up as well. So it becomes just a much more appealing campaign in itself. I think that's how I would kind of improve the Amazon side, but they don't need to because they're Amazon. This is it. They're completely unique. But another good example would be footwear retailer that we work with, where when we're building up their personalization model, their list of recommendations, when the recommendations kind of came back, it was all sort of black and brown shoes, because that's the majority of what they sell. And of course, what they bought on their first purchase, it's going to recommend them very similar things on the back of it. In an email campaign where you're trying to inspire the next purchase, having a list of black and brown shoes doesn't really stand out. And two, you can't really just say, well, you bought a pair of black work shoes, here's some more black work shoes you might be interested in. They're not going to buy that next time. So what you have to do is you have to infer things from their initial purchase, which might be brand in this case, which is very important to lead on what the next purchase might be. And you also have to employ almost like offline merchandising techniques to make these things more appealing. So one is you make sure there's only one type of style in each slot. So you're not going to have a whole series of formal shoes. You're going to have boots, trainers, all these sort of things. But also you're going to put your own data into the algorithm, which says, right, we'll make sure anything more colourful gets pushed up in the results. So it gives a higher weighting. Because that's what we call like the shop window effect. So the same retailer within their shop window would put all their colourful shoes, and they'd only buy a very, very small amount of those shoes for each store, because they know that customers will see the red shoe, come in and then buy the black or the brown version of it. But the learnings from the offline world, you can feed into those sort of personalization models as well. So, and this is it. A lot of people say, well, will AI and the likes of that sort of get rid of the marketer's job in the future? Well, that's a prime example of why it won't do, why creativity and the marketing team is really important when it comes to personalization. Their input is still what makes it important. It makes it work better, because you're doing the things that a machine can't do.
Yeah, I think when it comes to personalization, and obviously we picked up on this Amazon example, but it really could have been any sort of big business. You might instinctively think as a small or medium business, we've got nothing in common with Amazon. There's nothing I can learn from them. There's nothing I can adapt from them. But I think personalization is so great in terms of its scalability, in terms of its flexibility, that you can actually, even if you don't think you have much in common with Amazon, you can look at it, something like that, work out what they do, work out what you don't think they do as well, and then adapt it for your purposes. That's, I think, one of the greatest things about it. I just wanted to focus on one potential challenge of personalization and how to potentially overcome it? Because I think a lot of people might be interested in the concept, but the number one barrier might be either A, I don't have the data that I want to have, or B, I have data for about 30% of the database that I can use, but I don't have it for the rest. How do you think you should go about the process of fixing that so it's perhaps more worthwhile, because a greater percentage of your database will have the data that you need to pull it off?
Yeah, so usually in this situation where you've got sort of data for say 30% of your database, that's usually a situation where you've got a lot of 30% of place an order or booking or whatever it might be in the past. The other 70% have just literally signed up to your newsletter. You've got to bear in mind that 30% will be so much more valuable than the 70% anyway, that it's worth focusing your time, personalization methods on those anyway. But yes, that 70%, if you're capturing that, it's making sure you have the right data captured at the point to sign up. But also you can do things like add tracking code to your website, capture what people are looking at. So what holidays are they browsing, what products are they looking at? And that in itself will enable you to fill that sort of data gap over time. But the big problem usually with data is they have lots of it, but they just don't know how to do anything with it. And I think that comes because a lot of the email marketing tools that they're sort of using aren't really geared up to do anything other than here's a newsletter, I load up a list once a week, I send it out, and I capture some results. They were never really built this world of personalization. So you'll find there's now lots more solutions around companies which offer things like a single customer view, process all of that data, or more commonly called customer data platform nowadays. And you'll see very specialist personalization platforms which don't actually send email, but will sort of work with every email platform as well. So yeah, I think it's a case of not just looking at your ESP, I think looking elsewhere for assistance in those to get those sort of things up and running.
What
are your thoughts on that one, Rob?
Yeah, so to add to that, I think a lot of the companies that we might work with, some of the maybe smaller, more growing companies didn't think about having a large set of data when they started their email list. So they're in a position where they've got a lot of contacts, but not a lot about them, and they feel stuck. But I think it's important to remember that you don't just have one data capture point. You don't just have one email sign up form on your website and that's it. There's plenty more opportunities to gather more data to then use to personalize your campaigns. I mean, one example might be a competition or something like that, where it definitely helps as well to have a good exchange of value. So a customer is much more likely to give more information about themselves, hobbies, interests, that sort of thing, if they feel that there's a fair exchange happening. And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, I'd like to shift the conversation over slightly to sort of live personalized data. And I mean, this is one of the prime examples has already been picked up on. So the weather sort of report from maybe like a travel agency has already been picked up on. That's fairly effective in itself if you're able to load weather into the email, but it becomes increasingly more effective when you know that at the time of open, it is going to be live information. So Sean, do you see this being a real key component of not only email now, but in the future as well?
Yeah, it is an element. Live won't be important to everybody. Where it typically works is in things like retail, where you've got ever-changing pricing or stock volumes. It's important there. In travel, you're right, with the contextual side of things around what's the weather like in places. It's important there. Where I think the live is really important, it's actually almost like a side effect. It's the agile nature of your personalization. So it makes it so much easier to implement. The fact that you're not having to do big batch process all the time. It's constantly pulling in the right information into the emails without any involvement from you. That's, I think, where it has the biggest impact. And it cuts down a lot of the complex sort of integration projects you otherwise have with your email platform to continually feed data in. So yeah, I think it's important there. I think it won't be the be and end all of the campaigns, but it also allows you to have some more creative approaches to things. So we talked about using the weather or location data, but there's even just things like the date and time. Doing like every time you open an email, something's adapted based on what the latest deal is on the website, perhaps. Those sort of things can really just add a bit more impact and freshness to your campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, you would imagine like the more fast-paced the environment, the more useful it's going to be. If you are handing out dated information, it's only going to become more dated. And instances, and I think you're right in what you say. It's not always going to be appropriate, and for some businesses it might not be useful. But I think if you can establish how you can use it, and it's effective for you, then it's a really great tool. I mean, what are your thoughts on this one, Rob?
I mean, I see so many examples where this sort of live data could be used all the time, but it's not. I mean, one example that comes to mind for me actually is supermarkets. Like every supermarket has their own sort of loyalty card or something like that. And I think it would be just fantastic if you were able to get these live updates about how many points are on your balance, and this isn't just limited to supermarkets, of course. Any business with a loyalty card could probably do this, but how many points you got on your account, what, as Sean said, what are the latest deals, or maybe even what are the latest deals for you based on your previous purchases on your loyalty card, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we always bang on about relevancy being so important in email marketing, and this is just another example where it can really come to the forefront. I mean, Sean, with Reignite, obviously, this is something you're very experienced in, something passionate about as well. How, it's a bit of a broad question, but how easy is it to get something like this set up?
Yeah, quite easy, and it's actually a way that a lot of people can start personalizing without any of their own kind of customer data as well. So for things like just personalizing based on what current time or date is, you don't need any customer data for that, for doing this with the daily deals. Things like loyalty points, you can simply load in a CSV file, or you can, often these systems have got an API, you can just copy and paste that URL into a platform. There's all sorts of things as well around predefined data sources that we provide you. So here's a weather data source, which you don't know where that person lives, you can always specify, use their IP address to look up on the fly. And then there's all sorts of other pre-connectors, like if you want to live update your order confirmation emails with the latest delivery status of that order, you can do that sort of thing almost plug and play as well. So yeah, it's very simple, but it can also be as complicated as you want it to be as well. It works on that sort of level, and of course, the more advanced you get, generally the bigger the win you're going to have as well.
Yeah, and just one other thing I wanted to pick up on really is polling within emails. I know this is something that you've been on very recently, Sean. So if you wouldn't mind sort of explaining what what can be done in that respect. Yeah,
so kind of a byproduct of the live content we can put into emails is effectively putting a poll of, say, 3 or 4 or 5 different sort of options you can give people in quite a visual way, where not only are you giving them the answers they can click on to vote, but you're also showing how many people have voted in each of those other areas so far. Why that works well is because it's not just, here's an email saying, can you buy something off us today, please? It's a different way of engaging with people. And we find it works really well with kind of lapsed audiences where they've not been that active recently. You could use it to do things like, where are you thinking I'm going on holiday this year? You could be doing it around helping them educate themselves about what we're offering by saying, what are the favorite things you like about us, and it just reminds them of the sort of things that they should be thinking about. if you're introducing a new range of products, it's good for saying which of these is your favorite. And then you can use that information on the back of it to then send campaigns targeted to those people afterwards. So you've given them to say, you know, what's your favorite destination? Turkey, Greece, you know, Spain, and so on. You could send a specific email on the back of that saying, well, you said you're interested in Turkey. Here's some of the great deals we've got right now. And that really buys into the so if you're aware of like Cialdini's principles of persuasion, the commitment and consistency piece, people like to follow through on what they've said they'll do before. So it kind of gives you a double win. Said, yes, I did say that, and I am interested in Turkey. So it just creates a bit more impact than other types of personalization.
Yeah, and I think there is a real need to sort of have this return on time investment almost, where you want the process of obtaining data to be low effort for the people doing it and high reward for the people receiving it. So in that sort of an instance where it does take one click to sort of state a preference, it is about as low effort as it can possibly get for the consumer, but the reward can be potentially very high, not only for the business but also for the individual, that they're getting more targeted information that's relevant to them. I mean, what's your thought on polling within emails, Rob?
I think, you know, everything that's already been said is like, definitely I agree with it 100%. But I think something that should also be said is that something like this doesn't have to be seen as a way of collecting data or, you know, pushing purchases or anything like that. You can use things like this in a more casual or a more fun way, providing that's what your business is kind of, you know, oriented as. You wouldn't have Amazon doing this, I would expect. But just things like, what's your favorite film, and then have two options. It creates that kind of customer interactivity that hasn't existed within emails. And that in itself is very valuable. That sort of brand familiarity and connection, creating that with your customers will probably lead to a purchase down the line as well. I've seen in the past just things as simple as what's your favorite emoji, and that's it. So seeing the value in that as well.
Yeah, and I think your head of strategy, Nick Crawford, was making a really good point the other day about, you know, the current domestic travel industry. The fact that, you know, what do they do in terms of talking to their customers at the moment? Because they either can't, you know, promote their offering because they're just not allowed to open, or they're fully booked because demand is so high at the moment. But actually, this is the sort of thing where live polling can come in and keep your brand front of mind as a interesting piece of content where you're not asking them to sort of buy anything, or you're just using it as an excuse to sort of remind that you know, the hotel still exists and the great things that are going on. That's another great use of live polling, because we tend to see in that circumstance we get a far higher click rate, maybe 2-3 times than we would in, you know, generic non-interactive sort of email.
Yeah, it's a really good one to bring up as well. I mean, that's a great article that Nick put together, and we'll leave the link in the description for that one. I'd absolutely advise checking that one out after you're done here, just looking at, exactly what to do when demand is so high. How do you keep talking to your customers? It's a great read. I mean, we'll move on to the show and tell segment of the podcast, which is an email that you've brought along, Sean. For the record, I think it's an absolutely brilliant one, and unsurprisingly, it does focus on personalization. So if you wouldn't mind giving a brief overview of what the email is.
Yeah, so this is a London fitness brand called Frame, which have several studios in London, but not surprising, with lockdown, they also opened up an online presence, both live stream and on demand. And they're just a great brand as much as anything else. I mean, they have things where they say, you know, their phrase is, I don't go to the gym, I go to Frame. They're very strong in terms of their distinct identity. And I think the tone of voice comes across in this. And we were talking about personalization and creativity, and I think this is a really great example of it. So they've taken a very small subset audience, which is their highly active customers, and they effectively, at the end of the month, we play back to them their data in terms of how many classes they went to, and how many minutes they move their frame, which is their sort of ties back into their brand, and pulls out all sorts of other interesting stats like what's your most popular day of the week that you train on, what are the who's your favorite teacher, and other sort of stats like that in a very creative way. And one of the advantages to doing with real-time email content is they're able to do it in a much more creative way than it's just a standard HTML email. So they're able to use their own fonts. They're able to do all sorts of creativity things that you wouldn't be able to do with a normal HTML email. I mean, there's graph in there and stuff which is personalized to you. And I think one of the reasons I really, really like it is because you get this unheard of thing every month where customers will email in or ask this front of our studio people saying, where was my email? Because what happens is customers will start sharing that all across Instagram, and they'll see their friends have shared one and they didn't get one. And the reason they didn't get one is because they didn't go enough in the last month. So how many times do you ever hear someone saying, where's my email marketing campaign? You just don't hear it. So for that reason is why it's one of my favorites.
When you've had a look at this one, Rob, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I think it's just visually stunning. I mean, obviously it's, as Sean said, it's not HTML, it's all dynamic imagery, which, there is the argument about accessibility and things like that. But I think moving into the future, people have unlimited data caps and things like that on their phones. No one's as worried as they used to be about downloading images, and also the speeds are a lot faster, things like that. So putting together something like this isn't as crazy as it was even 5 years ago. And that allows you to be much more creative. I mean, it's beautiful, really. I mean, that style that they're going for is so impactful. But then on top of that, you've got all the data in there, like the graph and it kind of reminds me of the Spotify Wrapped things that you get. And I saw that shared so much on social media. People really love to kind of share that about themselves. And if it's about the gym as well, you get to boast. So
yeah, and I think other brands have tried to replicate that. I think Frame have done a very good job at getting there with the Spotify stuff. But you have got to be careful with personalization that you don't go down the route, say the Trainline did. Trainline tried to replicate that, and they trended on Twitter for the wrong reasons, because they just reminded people about their awful commutes and how much they were spending every year on train journeys. And it really depressed people, because that purchase is a necessity. It's not something you're necessarily engaged with. You have to go from A to B to get to work. And I think that's where you've got to be very careful with personalization, is, again, that, this is very much a motivation tool they're using here, that, to keep people really excited and reward them for great work they've done coming on to the fitness classes. But yeah, don't do a train line. Remind people about how much they're spending with you and stuff like that.
Yeah, not a good idea. And I always think it definitely should be a what you should do rather than a what you can do. And this is one of the points that I wanted to pick up on this, because I think it's a great campaign as well. I think the design is, as you rightly say, absolutely stunning. But the data that they've included is so easily digestible. And I think it's very easy to get caught in the trap of either not having it in that digestible format or just including too much to begin with. And you almost have to rein yourself in and put yourself in the shoes of the people that will be receiving this without knowing the ins and outs of Frame and how much data that they potentially hold on their customers. I would imagine they could go wild with this email. And if they wanted to, they could probably include about 2 or 3 times as much of the data that they've got here. It wouldn't serve them very well, though. So I think it's a great balance of simple but effective design that looks great, and then enough data to keep people interested, keep people wanting to receive these emails every month, but not so much that you look at the email and immediately put off by the amount that you're seeing. I mean, those of you on YouTube, you'll be able to see the email as it came up on the screen there, but those that are listening audio only will leave a link, so you'll be able to view that one, because it is a great look. So, I mean, I think we'll end the podcast here. Rob, Sean, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great chat all about personalization. Definitely encourage people to research it more, get involved with it. It's definitely a great trend, a great component of email that you should get on board with. But for this episode, we'll get out of here. Until next time, stay safe.